Welcome to Patty's Aquatics. So the plan for today, it's my favorite part of keeping fish, and I'm sure it's the favorite part of a lot of people out there, is feeding your fish. So I'm going to feed all my fish down here in my dirted filterless fish room. And while I do that, I'm going to explain how much food do I feed? Do I overfeed my fish? And then I want to go over some of the misconceptions that come along with feeding with this style of tank, in my opinion. Let's start with my 20-some gallon Hexagon tank. This houses a bunch of guppies and endler mixes that I had out in my summer tubs over the summer. Now, I want to delve right into the question that I proposed of, do I overfeed my fish? Now, I get that comment quite a bit over the last year or so since I've been on YouTube, and, well, to be plain and simple, yeah, I do overfeed them sometimes. But I'll get into that in a little bit. But as you can see right here, this horde of guppies and endlers eating this flake at the top of the surface. And that's a big reason why I overfeed my fish, because I have a bunch of babies in this tank and all my other live bearer tanks that need to get food. So I feel like a lot of the times I need to overfeed in those areas just so some of that food can get down near the bottom where a lot of these babies are hanging out. Another thing I do is what you just seen is that after I feed that main group, I'll throw a little bit more food away from there and push it down with my fingers. Now, the reason I do that is it sinks faster towards the bottom, and all those small fry are always hiding and swimming at a lower level than that main group at the top, so they can actually get some food. Now, barely any of that food hits the bottom, which is an issue for me as well, and another reason why I feed more food and it looks like I'm really overfeeding my fish. This is my high fin blue coral varieties tank. Now, back to the point why I believe it's an issue for me that food barely hits the bottom is because I have lots of inhabitants in these tanks. I have lots of shrimp, which I know are self-foragers and can pretty much rely on their own food sources from finding at the bottom. But I also have lots of snails, which I know, exact same. But my thing is I use these snails as a food source for my pufferfish. So I like extra food to hit the bottom for these snails to be able to eat on and want to trigger themselves to keep reproducing, because I do take a lot of them out of my tanks to feed that pufferfish, like I said. So those are the reasons why I feed the way that I feed. Now, the things that you probably wouldn't know watching my videos is I don't feed my fish every day, at least not for a while. I used to feed my fish every day that way, but that was before I got a better food brand. I've been feeding Northfin Foods for the last probably 3 or 4 months now. So since I've been getting that food and it's so high in protein, I have cut down my feedings to about once every 2 to 3 days. This is my silver veil angel pair. And then back to the point of what I was talking about of not feeding my fish every day any longer. And it's not just because I got a better fish food. It just simply fish do not need to be fed every day like that, in my opinion. I think, like I said in the very beginning of the video about how I'm going to do something that every fish keeper loves, that's feeding your fish. Well, I think that's the thing. I would probably suspect that a large majority of fish hobbyists are probably overfeed their fish one way or the other. And I can't speak for everybody, but I know I have been. And I kind of looked at that a little closer and just realized, the fish itself does not need to consume that much food every single day. Now, there's other ramifications of it as well. Now, I never had an issue with the nitrogen cycle. I have so many live plants and with this deep substrate. And like I've said in numerous previous videos, my nitrate level never goes above about 10 parts per million. But where I found an issue was because of feeding so much of that food and waste being dropped to the bottom of the substrate, this style of substrate with the dirted tank, it takes a while for that waste and organic matter to be able to break down and make its way to that dirt level that it was just too much of it. It basically was piling up. And I don't use mechanical filtration like I've said also in past videos. So I knew right then and there that this was not the way to go and I needed to cut back for the sake of my tanks. This is my 29-gallon tank, by the way, with my lone koi angel who is by the way, doing a lot better, is healed up and acting normal again. And I have to point out with this tank, the plants have just grown in phenomenally. This is slowly becoming one of my favorite tanks down here in my fish room. Now, the next thing I want to touch on when it comes to feeding fish, like I said in the opening, is some of the misconceptions of feeding a dirted style tank. But first is my 20 long with my Taiwanese orange-green double sword guppies. That is a tongue twister. Try saying that 5 times in a row without slipping up. I can barely say it once sometimes. Anyway, misconceptions of feeding a dirted tank. So the biggest thing that I see is when I start reading forums or comments on some Facebook groups and stuff like that is people will mention how they do not want like dirted tanks because you barely can keep any fish. You can barely feed any fish and blah, blah, blah. Have you seen my tanks? My tanks are jam-packed full of fish. And as I mentioned before, I probably feed them more than I should. Now, I believe you can feed a normal level of food to this style of tank the same as you would any other tank. Heck, I would even venture to say that I could feed my fish even more than I do now with what I mentioned earlier if I even kept filters. If I kept mechanical filtration, that would help me a great deal as well. But since I don't run mechanical filtration, that's where I need to be more aware. Like I mentioned earlier, with running this style of tank, these dirted filterless tanks, if I feed too much food, all that excess waste from the fish will pile up at the bottom, and my substrate can only break it down so fast, where that just piles up. And I think that's where the biggest misconception of this style of tank comes from. They say you can't feed much food is because of that. But I truly believe you could feed a normal level of food that you would feed your fish to this style of tank, especially if you're running filtration. But therein lies the problem, how much food we feed our fish. This is my 29-gallon tank that houses my pink endlers, and I have blue dream shrimp in here as well. Now, earlier I mentioned one of the reasons why I would put a mass amount of food in when I feed my fish is so that the smaller particles could reach down to the fry so they could eat it. I also want to add that there are, I would assume in most tanks, it wouldn't even have to be a planted, dirted tank, but if you have a seasoned tank, there should be some type of microorganisms that are within those aquariums for a lot of those fry to feed on. Maybe not as a main food source, but something that they could eat. And that's going to lead me into the next thing that I want to talk about. That is the father fish's food web method. Now, I dived into this a little bit this summer when I did my video, my journey with the father fish resurrection jar. If you're not familiar with his food web methods, I highly suggest you look at his YouTube channel. He's got a Discord that has lots of information within it, and there's also a Facebook group with a lot of people that talk on it. But the gist of it is, what I collected was a resurrection jar. You go to a local lake or stream or river, and you grab a handful of the gunk at the bottom of that water. You put it in that jar with some of the water from that tributary or wherever you're getting it from, and you bring that home. And you want to watch it for about 30 days. You watch all the organisms grow and come to life. And then what you do is you take that, you add it to your fish tank. And from there, that's when you want to add some leaves, some organic matter into your tank for those organisms to feed on. Now, this is my 20-gallon with my koi swordtails, by the way. Now, those microorganisms that you threw into this tank from that resurrection jar, they'll not only eat that leaf material, but they will also eat any of the organic matter and stuff within your tank and help break that down faster. So that is huge in my opinion. So not only will these organisms help break down and eat that organic matter faster at the bottom of your substrate, but they'll reproduce and become a food source for your fish. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure there's people on here that would tell me. I don't believe Father Fish ever said that this would be your lone way of feeding your fish. You still need to feed your fish, but it lessens the amount even more that you have to feed than you do now. So I find this all very intriguing, and I need to deep dive into it further. So my plan in the coming months is to get more jars and create more resurrection jars, and then create enough microorganisms to be cultures of, and I'm going to add them to numerous tanks, then do it the correct way, get organic matter with leaves to put in there to try to help the whole system with this food web, because I really think it's going to be very beneficial for this style of tank. This is my 10-gallon tank that houses my daughter's betta. I also have that small angelfish in here yet from my journey breeding angelfish that I was able to keep, survive, and grow, and it is thriving and eating. Then I also have a guppy breeding project in here, which I'm finding very fascinating how some of these are looking as they grow. I'm really liking this. I want to see kind of where it goes. But that being said, if you're still watching this video at this point, I just wanted to say that the purpose of this video is never to point fingers or to dictate to you that you need to stop feeding your fish this much, or you need to stop feeding your fish then or when, or whatever the case may be. I would be an absolute hypocrite if I was doing that. From the very beginning, I've never dictated to anybody what they should feed, how much they feed, or anything along those lines, and I never will, nor will I ever start to. This whole video has basically been more of an educational thing because of me figuring out for myself that I really have been feeding my fish too much. These are the ramifications. These are things that I could be doing, and I'm starting to do differently to help solve that. And if there's anybody out there watching this video, maybe that clicks and says, well, hey, maybe I should cut back a little bit too. And then speaking of overfeeding fish, this is the perfect example. This is my 75-gallon with my Fahaka puffer. When I first got this guy, everything I read said you should feed these Fahaka puffers 2 to 3 times a day as they're young. As they become adult size, that's where the confusion came. It very much varied. Some people would say I feed them once a week. Some say I feed them once a day. Some say I feed them like once every couple days. So I never knew. So I fed him once a day, because he was always begging for food. So I'd give him a piece of shrimp or a bunch of snails or whatever I had at the time to feed him. And he got very fat. If you go back and watch some of my first videos, like my feeding my Fahaka puffer when I fed him night crawlers, he was pretty chubby. I think he ate like four to six night crawlers in that video alone. Well, it got to the point where he started to not want to eat all the time. I would throw like this food here, this clam and a half shell. He wanted nothing to do with it. I would throw him in the tank, and the other little community fish that were in there would wind up eating it. Where now I cut back on what I feed him. I feed him probably once every 3 to 4 days. And now he eats these clams and a half shell like they're going out of style. Now that just goes to show you just how much a diet change or reduction in food can actually help a fish. He is more active now than he was when he would eat so much food and it would just sit there at the bottom all the time. I've never seen him swim around more now than I had the entire time since I've had him. Well, I hope you enjoyed that feeding, and I hope you understand my process of how I feed my fish a little better. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that subscribe button. But if you do, make sure you hit that notification bell, because you don't want to miss any of my upcoming projects. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time here at Patty's Aquatics.